Okay, the next item of business is the debate on motion 19123 in the name of Pam Duncan-Glancy on mobile phones in schools. I invite members wishing to participate in the debate to press the request to speak buttons. And I call on Pam Duncan-Glancy to speak to and move the motion up to 7 minutes. Ms Duncan-Glancy.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. It helped me focus. Fights and bullying at breaks have got better because no one has their phones in class to organise them. I spend more time talking to my friends now. I'm glad the temptation to go on my phone has gone. That's what young people told me about a ban in classrooms and schools for mobile phones when I met them last week. And that's why today Scottish Labour proposes a straightforward motion with a straightforward purpose: to ban mobile phones for learners in classrooms across Scotland to help make classrooms calm and safe places to learn. Because, Presiding Officer, education is crucial. It is the ladder to opportunity for all, and it is our job to move anything in the way of that vital goal. And, Presiding Officer, colleagues across this chamber will all know that there are many obstacles to that goal, and that the atmosphere in too many classrooms is a challenging one for learning and teaching. Teachers are overworked and firefighting disruption. The scaffolding that should be there to hold our young people up, timely mental health support, speech and language services, educational psychologists, has all been stretched thin and in some cases is non-existent. Bullying is up by nearly 200% in just 5 years. A School Leaders Scotland survey found that pupil behaviour is increasingly difficult to manage, and the government's own BISA research cites phones and social media as a factor, recognising that they are seriously disruptive. Yet, Presiding Officer, amidst all of this, we are still allowing this disruption in classes and the online world to pour into the school day through the rectangle in a young person's pocket, with the constant of notifications, group chats, viral clickbait and, yes, rising harmful content. The Cabinet Secretary says head teachers are empowered to end this if they see fit. But that is not leadership. That, I'm afraid, is passing the buck. Local delivery is crucial, yes, but it is the government's job to set clear expectations. That's why I cannot accept the government's amendment to the motion today. It leaves us where we are now, and I'm not prepared to stand still on the future for our young people. The pupils I met last week told me that when the temptation is removed, they talk to their friends more, they concentrate more, they feel calmer, they can hear themselves think. A national ban on phones in class frees young people and empowers staff and parents. It changes the temperature in the room. It draws a sensible boundary during lessons so that people can concentrate and teachers can teach. And importantly, it can be done in a way that involves young people, engages parents and empowers schools. Leaving it up to head teachers lacks leadership and does pass the buck. But, Presiding Officer, where the government have failed to lead, schools have stepped in. In Portobello, the model is simple and is delivered in a rights-protecting way. Pupils keep their property, but it's locked in a pouch for class and unlocked at lunch, not at break. Pupils can unlock to call home if they need to, and pupils who need more regular access to their phones, for example pupils with ASN or pupils with caring responsibilities, or some in the senior phase who might need messages about work, can all access their phone. In Notre Dame High in Glasgow, staff and pupils manage a clear off and away rule, together with classroom routines that everyone understands. Two different models, same outcome. More attention, fewer flashpoints, more time on task. But leadership cannot stop at the school gate. The government issued guidance and then shrugged. And so we now have a postcode lottery with teachers left to bear the weight of this crucial decision and parents left to navigate mixed messages. Empowerment without direction is abdication. And, Presiding Officer, our motion corrects that. I'll take an intervention.
Briefly, Cabinet Secretary.
I'm interested in the member's point in relation to the point she makes in terms of a postcode lottery. And obviously in Scotland, the 1980 Education Act makes clear that the statutory responsibility for the delivery of education rests with local authorities. So we have 32 different local authorities who very often actually interpret the curriculum in different ways. Is the Labour Party now suggesting that we repeal the 1980 Education Act and centralise education? I'm very keen to hear the message
Pam
on that.
Duncan-Glancy.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that intervention, but I draw the Cabinet Secretaries to Section 2 of the 1980 Education Act, which indeed has regulating making powers for the Government in a wide range of areas. And one does have to wonder how on earth anything that the Government wants to do in schools can get done if the Cabinet Secretary doesn't think the Cabinet Secretary for Education has any power over schools. That really does leave us in a situation where we can see an abdication of responsibility to Scotland's children and young people. What we are asking for in our motion today, Presiding Officer, is national clarity. No phones in class for learners, clear expectations, clear consequences and clear exceptions, including for pupils with ASN or who need devices for medical reasons, for example, as I've set out. National guidance should codify decisions on all of this, so that families are confident, staff are empowered and young people are freed to learn. Presiding Officer, we also have to acknowledge that technology is with us and has potential for our nation, of course. But despite SNP promises, not all pupils yet have the free iPads to learn on that they were promised. So some are relying on personal devices when teachers are using them in lessons. But therein lies inequity. Not all pupils have them. To be clear, we should not bake inequality into pedagogy by relying on personal smartphones where schools need a device for learning. But in the absence of the iPads the SNP promised, where teachers do want to use devices in a lesson, in schools where bans exist, teachers simply have the option to say, take out your device now for this task, for a specific purpose and in a specific period. I'm happy to take the intervention.
You don't really have the time, Ms Duncan-Glancy.
I'm sorry, I can't take the intervention. The default changes from phones first to learning first. That is what we are asking. We are asking that the Government take a practical, proportionate step with a classroom rule implemented with professional judgment and involving young people. The Government has dithered and the Government has delayed. Schools have improvised, parents have worried and pupils have paid the price. Today the Parliament has a choice. We can let schools keep muddling through, or we can set a clear expectation that every child in Scotland deserves a calm, phone-free lesson as standard, not as a postcode perk. Our ask today is simple. Make the rules clearer, make the day calmer, give teachers back time to teach and pupils the space to learn and to flourish. Support the motion for a national phone ban for learners during lessons. Our young people deserve it, and I urge members across the chamber to support it. Thank you, and I move the motion in my name.
Thank you, Ms Duncan-Glancy. Just to advise the Chamber, as ever, when there are two debates during the afternoon, we are pretty tight for time. There is not really an awful lot of additional time. With that, I call Jenny Eagle-Roos to speak to and move Amendment 19123.2 up to 5 minutes. Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, the Government agrees with the premise behind the Scottish Labour Party motion that mobile phones should be banned in our schools. The motion today from Labour is very simple. People like that from politics. Simple solutions to the challenges of the modern age. I do think it's missing something, though. That is the professional judgment of Scotland's teachers, who we trust to educate our children every day. Now, I'm sure Scottish Labour are not suggesting that we ignore the views of Scotland's teachers on this important issue. With that in mind, I am surprised to hear that they will not be able to vote for the Scottish Government's amendment tonight, which makes that clear. I do think, Presiding Officer, that we should listen to our teachers. It's what I spend much of my time as Cabinet Secretary doing. Understanding how mobile phone bans work is rather important. The national guidance, which published last August, states that it means empowering our head teachers to take the steps they see fit to limit the use of mobile phones in our schools, up to and including a full ban on the school estate during the school day, if that is their judgment. I am clear in publishing this guidance that, as Cabinet Secretary, I will support any head teacher who decides to institute a ban on mobile phones in their school. I give way to the member.
Duncan-Glancy, briefly.
But the point that I made when I set out why we're proposing this motion today is because you're leaving it up to head teachers to take quite a big decision on what goes on in schools. Does the Cabinet Secretary think there should be a mobile phone ban in classrooms and schools for learners or not? Cabinet Secretary.
I say to the member very gently, but it is quite clear in the national guidance that our head teachers are already empowered to carry out mobile phone bans. But I have to ask why Scottish Labour don't trust our head teachers to do that. It's not for me sitting in an office in Edinburgh to dictate to Scotland's teachers. Why do the Labour Party think they know better than Scotland's teachers? Now, what interests me in Scottish Labour's approach, and I'm going to be really interested in how this argument develops, is how exactly they would intend to implement a national ban. Now, I presume they are proposing primary legislation. I think I heard from the member earlier on a suggestion around regulations, but whether it's primary leg, whether it's regulations, happy to do so.
Duncan Glancy.
I thank Cabinet Secretary for taking the intervention. We're not proposing primary legislation. What we said was that the Cabinet Secretary is the person who said that legislation was required, and I'm saying if you choose to do so, you could use Section 2 of the 1980 Act, regulating making powers which are already in the gift of this government.
Always through the Chair, Cabinet Secretary.
As I have just intimated, whether it is primary legislation that's being proposed, and I hear the member's point in relation to regulation, I have to ask why, because regardless of whole school approaches, it is not my experience that pupils would routinely be sitting with their phones out in class, quite unlike MSPs in this chamber. There is an irony that I want to return to on this point, because mobile phone use is corroding the way in which we all communicate. If Scottish Labour want a ban on phones in our schools, what are their views on mobile phone use in this Parliament? For absolute clarity, of course, I would support a day in this place being set aside to us committed to not using our electronic devices. We should, as politicians, be leading by example. It cannot be do as I say, not as I do. Now, that's why, if Labour MSPs are interested, how our head teachers go about implementing full-scale bans is actually really important. And I heard that, of course, this morning when I was in Portobello High School, the school that Ms Duncan Glancy alluded to, the school that took 9 months in total to implement its ban because I had to listen to and work with its whole school community. It does involve communication. The national guidance that published last year gives guidance on how schools can do this. Last year, I also visited Stonelaw High School to launch the new national guidance on mobile phones. The head teacher at Stonelaw High had all the young people bought into the ban. She achieved this working with her staff by doing a number of different things. Parental engagement and buy-in was key. That action helped to buy in parental support. Buy-in with pupils looked at pupils mining their own data use, checking how much time they were spending online. Teachers joined in. Staff and pupils alike were horrified by the amount of time they were wasting online, and young people were receiving on average 18 notifications in a 1-hour PSE lesson. Now, pupils spoke to me with passion about how the ban was implemented in their school. In Stonelaw, it was an approach which allowed pupils to use their devices in social areas and during break times. This, the pupils felt, was a fair approach to trusting them as young people. Being able to use their phones during breaks and in social areas was a privilege that they would not abuse. If they broke the rules, their phone would be confiscated until the end of the lesson. How you get that buy-in, presiding officer, is really important. If you just ban something, behaviour change is not assured. You have to educate people, which is the part our schools are real experts in, not MSPs sitting in Holyrood. Now, I do agree that mobile phone use can be a distraction to learning and teaching, and indeed the significant disruption caused by mobile phones in classrooms was a key theme of the Behaviour in Scotland Schools research, which was published in 2023. But more broadly, presiding officer, there are a number of questions at the heart of this government's approach to mobile phones in schools. In Scotland, as we've already heard, our local authorities have the statutory responsibility to run our schools, not the Scottish Government. Now, I don't think that Scottish Labour, as we've heard, are proposing to change that. But snappy one-liner debates might help to craft a press release, but they really stack up in terms of detail. The position of our guidance is that we trust Scotland's head teachers to take the action they consider necessary, including a mobile phone ban across the school day. But the question I want to hear the answer to today is why Scottish Labour don't trust Scotland's teachers to lead the change we all want to see. Presiding officer, I move the amendment in my name.
Thank you. I now call Miles Brigg to speak to and move amendment 19123.1. Up to 4 minutes. Mr.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I start by thanking the Labour Party for bringing forward this debate, because Scottish Conservatives brought forward a very similar debate in January of this year, and I'm pleased that since then we have seen our call for a national ban on mobile phones in classrooms. We have seen other parties, and I think the Cabinet Secretary herself, move to support such a position, because we are clear that there are growing concerns around behaviours in our classrooms, and mobile phones are often at the heart of that. As Pam Duncan Glancy has said, our classrooms must be safe spaces for pupils to learn and teachers and classroom assistants to teach. But for so many of our young people, they are not, and concentration is one of the key things we need to make sure is restored. Many schools can be and are great learning environments for our young people, and teachers to be able to deliver the lessons we all want to see. But we also need to make sure that there are standards set. And last week, I was delighted to visit Leith Academy, and I know the Cabinet Secretary visited last week as well. And I welcome what the school is doing to support pupils. I welcome some of the pupils to Parliament yesterday. And I've been really impressed by the work they are doing around this and actually expectations of pupils and their mobile phones in classrooms. Most schools can manage that moving forward. But in too many cases, our school environments have become toxic, with students and teachers experiencing stress, bullying and other negative behaviours. And often, like I say, at the heart of that can be mobile phones. So there must be action to ensure poor behaviour in the classroom has consequences, and actually we look towards not having phones out in classrooms. I therefore welcome the fact that there does now seem to be a clear consensus across Parliament that we want to send out a clear message, that we want to ban mobile phones in classrooms, and that is what we want to see all 32 councils move to implement. Here in the capital, as it's been stated, Edinburgh City Council are leading by example. I welcome the fact Conservative councillors have secured a ban on mobile phones in Edinburgh's primary schools. That will be brought in November. And as has been stated, we've already seen two secondary schools in Portobello and also at Queensferry pilot issuing special sealed wallets, which have one sealed required magnetic, easy sometimes to say, Deputy Presiding Officer, pad to unlock them. And pupils are allowed to keep their phones in the classroom. That is an expensive solution to this problem, and speaking to staff, the additional staff support which is needed to seal these and unseal these is problematic. So I'm open to and want to see different approaches taken forward, and think head teachers should be at the heart of how that's taken forward in our schools. And that's something I think all schools already try to make sure they manage, and their head teachers have policies around that. As I say, Scottish Conservatives have led the debate around our toxic school environments. We've called for a reset on that, and I hope ministers have started to listen on that. Parliament can continue, I hope, to listen to some of the common sense voices we are bringing to Parliament for teachers, for parents and ultimately for our young people. That's why I welcome the progress we've seen to deliver some of the changes we want to see. The review of additional support for learning, which we secured in May. And ultimately for Parliament to send the message out today that we want to see a national ban on mobile phones in classrooms, and for all councils to work to take that forward. That is what my amendment looks to achieve, and I move it in my name. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Briggs. And I call Patrick Harvey up to 4 minutes. Mr Harvey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Pam Duncan-Glancy quoted some young people welcoming the change of policy on phones in classrooms, and she talked about a sensible boundary during lessons. I welcome that. And I will support the motion, but I do think it's disappointing that Labour doesn't support the government amendment, which also seems sensible and balanced to me. It does seem as though Labour want to present the idea of a simple blanket and uniform rule, while still acknowledging the need for exceptions, both for individual reasons and for circumstances. And I do think that we need to recognise the autonomy of schools. That being said, while I support the motion and the government amendment, the Cabinet Secretary said Labour's motion is missing something. I think both the motion and the amendment are missing something. Because this isn't just about distraction in class. It's also about young people's ability to learn to navigate an increasingly fraught, hostile and disturbing information landscape. And the many aspects of today's permanently online life don't stop when the school day ends, far from it. Young people face multiple issues, whether that's bullying, targeted abuse against minorities, marketing, conspiracy theories, racist and far-right content, all beaming at them 24/7 through these devices. And this isn't accidental. It's built into the business models of social media platforms and others. I want to cite the death of 23-year-old Paloma Shemirani. Paloma's mother had been radicalised against science-based healthcare by this type of content, and this influence led Paloma to refuse chemotherapy that could have saved her life. Her story has become a tragic example of the way social media platforms like Instagram, TikTok and X have become sources of health information and disinformation, with millions of people, increasingly young people, relying on them for advice and being misled. Other health conspiracies circulate, whether that's anti-vaccine conspiracies, from the promotion of fake treatments. Just recently, days after Donald Trump promoted dangerous rubbish about paracetamol and autism, a member of this Parliament even echoed that same baseless idea. So Scotland is by no means immune. Prejudice, racism, anti-migrant propaganda, homophobia, transphobia, all have been growing in intensity to the point where, even at the highest level of politics in the UK, there are politicians who openly debate whether black or brown people can ever be British, English or Scottish, ideas that not so long ago would have been the preserve of the BNP. And much of this activity is promoted and even directly paid for by social media platforms themselves. X, YouTube and others are paying people huge sums of money to produce it and then aggressively pushing it out to audiences, especially to young people. So this torrent of far-right and conspiracist propaganda is the information landscape that young people are growing up in. And if phones are switched back on as soon as they leave the classroom, they are still vulnerable. So, Presiding Officer, I'll back the motion and the government amendment today. The policy stance on phones in classroom is fine as far as it goes, and I'm not sure that the debate about whether it should be a blanket decision by a Cabinet Secretary or the autonomy of individual schools and head teachers, I don't think that's really where the issue is at. We mustn't allow this action to result in complacency about the wider issue, the world of abusive, bigoted, conspiracist and untrue content that we've all created, and the impact it's having on everyone, including the young people growing up on it. So, Presiding Officer, no phones in classrooms? Fine. But it won't end the need to take a far more robust approach to regulating social media and tackling the far-right and toxic culture warriors.
Thank you. I now call Willie Rennie again, up to 4 minutes. Mr Rennie.
I think there is an agreement this afternoon that mobile phones in the class can be incredibly distracting. The evidence across the education world is growing that it damages academic performance. It can be a major source of distraction. The kind of constant notifications, as we all experience on our phones, can create a state of hyper-vigilance, a lack of concentration. And it has an effect on the wider school, in terms of the number of conflicts that there are, the number of fights there are between pupils, conflict with teachers. I think there's an acceptance right across the chamber that that is the case. I think there's also an acceptance that it contributes towards the trio of issues that the Cabinet Secretary often talks about in terms of absence, additional support needs and behaviour. It adds to that mix and actually exacerbates the problems within that. And Patrick Harvey's point about the wider world of the internet is an extreme challenge to our way of life. And school is often a haven for education, for peace, for a bit of normality away from all of that in the wider world. If there's trouble at home, school can be a place of safety. And what we're talking about here is exactly how do we execute that. And I would like to see the evidence as to what the current policy of the Cabinet Secretary, the impact of that is so far. Because I hear some good examples of some where the phones are handed in at the front of the class at the beginning of the lesson and handed back at the end, and it has an impact on the performance of that class. But equally, I hear too often that there's still a debate about whether it's a good thing or not. And we should recognise that the evidence and the science is clear that it isn't a good thing for it to be happening in the class. And we shouldn't leave any doubt about that, and the Cabinet Secretary needs to play a role in that. And there's been a bit of a difference in the way that she's talked about it today. She said on the one hand that she thinks a distraction, but on the other hand she wants to leave it to the power of the head teacher. Now, I want to empower head teachers, but that kind of indicates that there maybe is circumstances where it's appropriate to have it in the class. I think we need to be clear that the evidence is growing, the science is clear, the studies are clear, that that state of hypervigilance is not a good thing. So I'd like the Cabinet Secretary to reflect on that in her closing remarks, because we do need to send a very clear signal to head teachers about what we think the balance is, and the Education Secretary's got a leadership role in that. But also, head teachers need a bit of support because they face a number of different challenges, quite sometimes challenging parents who come into the class and demand things from teachers, but also from the head teacher. And if it is the direction from the Education Secretary, it means the head teacher has got support from the Education Secretary, got her back, has got the support. It means that it's perhaps slightly more easier to implement that ban. And then the final thing, I think, is the peer pressure. I know many young people who would just love a day without having to go on their phones, because the way it changes their demeanour, their ability to have talk in the playground or in, in the canteen or in roundabout in the corridors, just being able to get those human connections back again rather than everybody being stuck in their phone all the time. So I think if we can seek the positive of that change in behaviour, that schools are a haven for that, I think that is something we should be aiming for. So I will support the motion and the Conservative amendment this afternoon, because I do think we need to go further.
Thank you. We now move to the open debate. I call first Pauline McNeill to be followed by Paul McLennan. Up to 4 minutes, Ms McNeill.
I believe it is time to ban mobile phones in all Scottish classrooms. We do need to shield children from harmful content, misinformation, bullying and other social pressures. As Pam Duncan-Glancy says, make the classroom a safe place to learn. I was shocked to read that the research by Ofcom indicates that a quarter of 3- and 4-year-olds in the UK now has a smartphone, and by the time they're 12, that percentage rises to 89%. So this is the current trend in society, and by the time they come to education, it gets much harder for educators actually to control something that is going on outside. With the rise in cyberbullying, our children are exposed to an unacceptable amount of danger, and there is pressure on parents to provide smartphones. Willie Wren is quite right to talk about peer pressure, and I think that will dissolve to some extent if there's a ban on mobile phones in schools. I think it would also take the pressure off head teachers themselves, who still would have to deal with a minority of parents who may still want to keep phones. The government does appear to clearly support a ban as long as head teachers make that decision, and this is what we're arguing over here. But I rather think that it is a big responsibility of government, given the trend I've talked about, given the harm being done to children, for that to be a government decision. And I don't believe that it does undermine the Education Act and the delivery of education by local government in any way whatsoever. The tech companies are incredibly powerful, and we know that even as adults, and the policies that we drive to reduce violence against women and girls, for example, and social media content, is a constant battle with those companies. But the algorithms that they use drive people towards certain behaviour. And for me, one of the biggest reasons that I support a ban is that there's an increasing body of data showing excessive social media, being exposed to excessive social media is rewiring young brains in a critical window of psychological development. And that is my primary concern, and it always has been. So I do agree with General Garuth. Listen to your head teachers, but listen to your scientists. Your scientists are unequivocal, and they have been saying this for a decade. I think that is enough of a basis to say that we have a responsibility to impose a ban. And reducing that at age. I mean, the difference between, again, the Cabinet Secretary is quite right, MSPs are the worst offenders at committees, we know that. But we're talking about children here, and our responsibility to children, and that's really why I'm speaking in this debate. It's a lot to ask a child to navigate all of this stuff online to protect themselves. And I do wonder, at some point in the future, those children may ask, why did we not act stronger at the time when we had a chance, but leave it to them? Because a recent survey you might have noticed of Gen Z adults between 18 and 27 who've just come out of school, they've grown up with social media, and they found nearly half of them wish that TikTok, Snapchat and Twitter, X, had never been invented, believe it or not. So this generation are already alive to the dangers of smartphone use that they've already come through. And finally, in my last minute, or under a minute, Presiding Officer, I wanted to talk about the wider harms that Patrick Harvey talks about, because he's quite right to say by banning mobile phones in school, we will not reduce all the harm. But we do know that smartphones are used, especially by boys, to for intimate image abuse, and the exposure of 12-year-olds to pornography on smartphones is as much about protecting boys as it is about protecting women and girls. Now, this is clearly a wider question, but a lot of this goes on in schools. Now, I have been calling on the government for some time to do some data about what is going on in our schools, because England and Wales have done this. But this is something that I hope that we will legislate further on in terms of what needs to be done about the creation of this content and teaching children this is unacceptable behaviour. So, for all of these reasons, I believe this generation expect governments to take big decisions, and I think the time has come for there to be a national ban on mobile phones in our classrooms.
Thank you. I now call Paul McLennan to be followed by Neil Bibby. Up to 4 minutes, Mr McLennan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and thanks to Pam Duncan-Glancy for bringing this debate today. Like many of us in the Chamber today, we've all had casework on this issue over the past few years. East Lothian Council have had a policy of allowing individual schools to decide on their own policy. I'm also aware of different opinions within schools in East Lothian. There are different opinions with parents whom I've liaised with as well. And it comes back to the point that the Cabinet Secretary mentioned as well. This is all about Scottish Government empowering head teachers in schools to make decisions around about mobile phones that works for them in supporting their own children in their own local education area. Of course, classrooms must be a safe environment. I don't think you'll hear any of us disagreeing with that. But of course, we must recognise the role that mobile phones can play in contributing to distraction and challenging behaviour. But the vast majority of pupils are... Yes, very briefly.
Craig Hoy, briefly.
I thank Mr McLennan for giving way. Some of the children that I've spoken to in East Lothian and beyond say that they use their mobile device in the classroom as a learning aid. Is he embarrassed that the SNP's commitment to provide every school pupil with an internet-connected tablet or laptop and support to use it has not been delivered in this Parliament?
Paul McLennan.
No, I'm not embarrassed. I think that the Government have made good progress in that particular regard. So, as I said, coming back to equipping head teachers with the guidance and means to act in the best interest of pupils and addressing concerns around about mobile phones. The Government supports Scotland schools in taking the necessary steps to tackle the negative effects associated with mobile phone use to enhance outcomes, obviously, for all of Scotland's people. Now, of course, there is growing evidence, which we've all talked about, which suggests overexposure to mobile phones can negatively impact concentration levels and result in isolation. Now, the decision to implement a ban on mobile phone rests with the head teachers, and I've had discussions with head teachers, as I said, in East Lothian and about that, who know their pupils best and staff and are trusted to make decisions in the best interests of their pupils. So these decisions aren't made in just in isolation. There's been guidance. Mobile phones guidance was published in August 2024 to provide support to the teachers to ensure a consistent learning environment for pupils. So we're not just looking at this in isolation. I've only got 4 minutes, I'm sorry, in terms of already taken one. So the Government is providing schools with comprehensive guidance on a range of approaches to responding to behaviour. Now, this builds on the guidance which was published in June 2025 to promote positive relationships and behaviours across the whole school community. And this is an important part. This was developed from input from head teachers, teaching unions, local government and educational psychologists. And it focuses on improving outcomes by reinforcing positive behaviour and working to reduce the likelihood of negative behaviour occurring in the future. The Scottish Government guidance is the latest commitment to be delivered through the Joint Relationships and Behaviour in Schools Action Plan with COSLA. And, of course, there's an actual action plan on behaviours in 24 to 27 is responding again to evidence on behaviour in Scotland schools research in 2023. Around about 4,000 school staff from across Scotland participated in the report published in 2023. The Joint Action Plan is a collaborative exercise and is informed by Scottish Government, COSLA, and again we're talking about partners, Education Scotland, parents and carers. 20 key action points are designed to support schools in their practice and approaches delivered across 3 years and led by partners, including national and local government and third sector partners. Presiding Officer, Scotland has a good education system with great schools and great teachers. We should be trusting them more. We all want our children and young people to get the most out of the learning opportunities available to them, and all young children and young people have the right to get the support they need to reach their full learning potential. There are real challenges in Scotland's schools at the current time. We're all aware of that, and it would be far more beneficial for Scotland's children and young people to see if parties be able to work together to respond to the challenge. In my experience in closing, local schools, with their own knowledge, know how best to deal with their own mobile phone strategy. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call Neil Bibby to be followed by Stephen Kerr. Up to 4 minutes, Mr Bibby.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I welcome the opportunity to speak in support of my colleague Pam Duncan-Glancy's motion, which calls for mobile phones to be banned for learners in school classrooms. We are having to bring this debate forward because of the continued inaction and dithering from the Scottish Government. I will declare an interest. I have 2 primary age school children. they don't have mobile phones, because I don't think it's appropriate for them to do so as of yet, but I do very much recognise what Willie Rennie said about peer group pressure. I fully appreciate and understand every parent will make choices about if and when it's appropriate to give their child a mobile phone with the best interests of their child in mind. I particularly understand that many parents give their children a phone for safety reasons, so they can contact their child should there be an emergency. And many children take mobile phones to school for that reason. This would not prevent that, but prevent the misuse of those mobile phones in the classroom, because schools and classrooms should be a space for learning, growing and flourishing. But mobile phone use is a known distraction in the classroom, which is limiting the ability of teachers to teach and learners to learn. Not only that, as we've already heard, bullying sadly continues to be a problem in Scottish schools, with cyberbullying increasing, falling children inside and outside school. And we've seen sickening examples of vicious attacks in schools filmed on mobile phones and spread across social media. And it's for all these reasons that Scottish Labour would implement a nationwide ban on mobile phones in classrooms to make schools safe, attentive places for learning again. And it is important to listen to what teachers and parents are saying, and I very much have been listening to teachers and parents in my own area, where there has been good progress made to limit the misuse of mobile phones in classrooms. And I've got to say, the overwhelming majority of teachers and parents that I speak to agree with a nationwide ban. But it's also important to listen to the views of young people, and young people themselves are also saying that it's causing them distraction in the classroom. And having listened to the concerns of young people, I would also say there, of course, would need to be exemptions considered for school children with caring responsibilities or who need it for medical reasons. But the assumption would be the vast majority of children do not require a mobile phone in the classroom. Because messaging between pupils, filming in classrooms, causing pranks, using mobile phones for those reasons are unacceptable and shouldn't be tolerated, and I would say shouldn't be allowed to happen in the first place, and that's why we should have a nationwide ban of mobile phones in the classroom. There has, of course, been progress in a number of areas, but I would say to the Scottish Government and the Cabinet Secretary, we should have that nationwide ban. And I'd also say to the Scottish Government, who have recently announced their support for a ban on greyhound racing, despite there being next to no greyhound racing in Scotland, let's actually ban something that's going to make a significant difference to Scotland's children and young people. And it's also not to say in this debate that digital learning cannot make a good positive difference to young people's lives. But I would say this should be done using laptops and tablets and technology specifically designed for learning, not kids' own mobile phones. And on the issue of laptops and devices, we just heard from Mr Hoyle. Let's not forget the SNP manifesto in 2021 to provide every primary and secondary school-aged child in Scotland a laptop or tablet to get online. This pledge was scrapped last year. Mr McLennan said the Scottish Government was making real progress. Apparently in 2024, the Scottish Government had only issued 60,000 devices, despite there being 700,000 school pupils. So I don't really would count that as progress, because if we were marking that out of marks of 10, Mr McLennan, the Scottish Government wouldn't even get 1 out of 10 with those figures. So it is the story of this Government. Big promises made, big promises broken, all talk, no action, all spin, no substance. We've heard a lot about distraction this afternoon. Perhaps the Scottish Government should stop being distracted by the Constitution, by grievance politics, and focus on the issues that matter and introduce a nationwide ban on mobile phones in classrooms that will make a difference to our children and young people. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call Stephen Kerr to be followed by Karen Adam. Up to 4 minutes. Mr Kerr.
Yeah, how about that? A government that isn't distracted with grievance, manufacturing grievance all the day long. That would be quite a government, quite an improvement on what we've already got. I know there are wider issues. Patrick Harvey went on at length about the wider issues, but we're talking about the learning environment in schools. That's what we're talking about. And I hadn't really come across that phrase, hypervigilance. I like that. It's a good description of exactly what we're trying to combat. I make no apology for standing up to argue in favour of order and discipline in our schools. Because order and discipline require consequences, and they require sanctions. And without them, there's no respect. And with no respect, there's no learning environment. So these are not optional extras. These are the very foundations of what makes an education system work. And look at the research. I know that sometimes we have an aversion to looking at evidence in this Parliament, but look at the evidence of what's happened in Spain. They talk there about gaining the equivalent of up to a year of extra learning in science, significant improvements in maths. In Norway, they talk about how it's boosted girls' grades, reduced bullying, lowered stress and anxiety. In North America, for goodness sake, They talk about the calmer lessons, higher levels of engagement in the classroom, improved test scores. UNESCO, unequivocal. Smartphones in school, they say, only when they clearly support learning. Only. The OECD has shown that digital distraction costs people months of learning time, with 2/3 of teenagers in its surveys admitting they are distracted in class by phones. Sometimes their own, often their classmates. So the Scottish Government itself, its own behaviour in Scottish Schools Research Report, highlighted, and I quote, abusive use of mobile phones and digital technologies as one of the most serious disciplinary problems in our classrooms. And that same report revealed shocking rises in violence and disruption. Almost 90% of teachers in secondary schools said pupils were sometimes or frequently off task, and more than half reported serious verbal abuse. Physical violence against teachers has also risen alarmingly. So, look, the conclusion is obvious. Mobile phones undermine learning. They undermine discipline. They undermine the happiness of children and young people. And they undermine the authority of teachers. So, as a general rule, they should not be seen or used in classrooms, save for the rarest of circumstances, when they directly support learning. But, and this is the point, and I'm aghast, really, that the Cabinet Secretary cannot grasp this. Teachers and head teachers cannot do this alone. You may say that they have autonomy to do this, and that's true, but it's not an easy thing to do. They have to deal with the consequences of the decision they make to ban mobile phones in their schools, and that's been highlighted by other speakers. But they are standing up to the everyday disruption, disorder and often violence. And they are often left feeling, because anyone that's spoken to a head teacher must know this, that they're alone in confronting these challenges, because the national direction, the national guidance is lacking, and without the backup from this Parliament that they so badly need.
Mr Kerr is just winding up.
I want to say this. Teachers and head teachers deserve the unambiguous backing, not just of ministers, but of every member of this Parliament. They must know that when mobile phones are banned in their schools, they are enforcing that rule with the full support of Government and Parliament. Government action must reflect a broader society that backs parents and teachers in making the right choices for our children. It will take resolute, collective action. Parents, teachers, communities and this Parliament acting together to make a ban real and effective. Presiding Officer, the choice before us is simple. Order and discipline in our classrooms, or continued distraction, disruption and decline. And for the sake of Scotland's children, it is imperative that we choose order.
Thank you, Mr Kerr. I now call final speaker in the open debate, Karen Adam, up to 4 minutes. Ms Adam.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I think it's important to begin this debate by recognising something that I think we don't say nearly enough in the Chamber. Scotland has fantastic schools, led by great teachers and filled with hard-working young people. Now, too often we talk about education here, we speak as if our pupils are a problem to be solved. And I'll be honest, I find that incredibly insulting and frustrating. Childhood and adolescence are not problems, they are stages, very normal in human development. They're full of learning and growth, and our job is to support that journey, not to reduce it to sound bites that paint young people in the worst possible light. I've got a lot to get in at the minute. Now, turning to Labour's motion calling for a blanket ban on mobile phones in classrooms, let me be clear. Mobile phones, yes, I agree, they can and do cause distraction. There are times when they contribute to negative behaviour, and there is growing evidence that overuse can affect concentration and social interaction. I don't think any of us deny those facts. But the real question isn't whether these are challenges, it's how best we respond to them. Just last month, I was speaking with a teacher in my constituency who told me that they had introduced a phones away policy during lessons, but still allowed phones at lunchtime because for some pupils, especially those with additional support needs, access to music or online communication was vital. And that flexibility worked for their school. Now compare that to another school where a complete ban during the whole day was also the right approach. Both policies are valid because both come from professionals who know their pupils and their staff. And on exemptions, wouldn't that just be creating the same admin, the same police and the same managing, but with less powers and more restrictions? That's what I think. That's why the Scottish Government's approach makes far more sense. Empower the head teachers and schools to make the decisions that are right for their school communities. Labour, I'm sure, would be the first to complain if the Scottish Government swooped in with central diktats on other matters, undermining the professional judgment of teachers. Local authorities and school leaders know their pupils, their staff and their environment far better than we ever could on these benches. They are best placed to decide whether a mobile phone policy means a complete ban, restricted use or managed access. And they already have the power to do that. So, let's also not pretend that this government has been idle. Last year, detailed guidance on mobile phones was published, designed with input from teachers, unions and educational psychologists. And just a few months ago, new guidance on building positive relationships in schools followed. And these aren't about leaving schools to fend for themselves, far be it. They are about equipping them with evidence and support to make the best choices. And it's worth remembering the broader context here. Almost 4,000 staff contributed to the Behaviour in Schools research report, and it showed most pupils are well behaved and dedicated, while also highlighting challenges like misogyny and worsening behaviour in some places, like my colleague Patrick Harvey had spoken about. But that's exactly why the National Action Plan on Relationships and Behaviour was created, bringing together government, COSLA, parents, carers and the third sector. It's about partnership, not headline grabbing. Presiding Officer, if we want young people to learn healthy communication, resilience and balance in a digital age, the answer cannot simply be to legislate phones out of sight. It does little to prepare young people for the world beyond the classroom, where digital communication is a daily reality. So let's not fall into the trap of making children the scapegoats for wider frustrations. Let's respect their development, respect our teachers, respect the principle that those closest to the classroom are the best place to decide what happens in it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Adam. We move to closing speeches. I call first Patrick Harvey, up to 4 minutes. Mr Harvey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Okay, it's been an interesting debate, but I think that the number of people who've used the word distraction is coincidental with the fact that it's been a slightly distracted debate itself. I think Neil Bibby was the first one to suggest that the government was being distracted. He said they were being distracted by the Constitution. I think Neil Bibby is the only person who mentioned it in this debate, proving that it's not only independent supporters who are distracted by the Constitution. But I think personally there have been aspects of this debate where we've been distracted from the real issue. It's not only in classrooms where that happens. Should this serious debate really come down to the difference between a Cabinet Secretary issuing an edict or respecting the autonomy and the judgment of schools and head teachers? I think that in itself is the distraction from the wider issue that I think all members across the chamber are genuinely concerned about. People have talked about the impact on learning, the impact on conflict. These are social phenomena. These are cultural phenomena. These are part of our behaviour. They come from us. They don't inevitably come from the technology itself. I've been left thinking, if you had described these devices to me when I was a young person growing up in school in the west of Scotland in the 1980s, they would have sounded like something from science fiction. A great, enlightening, liberating technology, giving us all access to the sum total of human knowledge, the ability to communicate with anybody else in the world. This would have sounded so utopian. It's become something deeply dystopian in reality. And I consider the environment, the social and cultural environment I was growing up in as a queer young person in 1980s west of Scotland. And I just imagine how much worse that experience would have been with that direct line for every homophobic bully on the planet, whether somebody at the next desk in my classroom, or somebody in government or in a position of power in the country being able to access me, beam that prejudice right into my eyeballs, how much worse it would have been, and how much worse it is, for example, for young trans people coping with the level of prejudice that is being beamed through these devices right into their eyeballs every day. Not to mention young people who are being affected by racism or anti-migrant prejudice. Those who are vulnerable to the pressure to present Instagram lifestyles and Instagram bodies. Those who are desperate for information about their health or their well-being and finding only lies and conspiracies. I'm afraid I don't have time. Ending the use of phones as a distraction in class, fine. But we also need to give our schools the ability to give young people the skills to navigate their lives in an information age and in a disinformation age as well. And if we want schools to give those skills, then sometimes the question will be, what is the right role for phones in classrooms, in the right context, not just a blanket ban? And I finish, Presiding Officer, by saying once again, this problem doesn't stop when the school day ends, when young people leave the class or leave the school. Far from it. And the harm that all members are concerned about in this debate, they are not inevitable. They are really the result, not of the technology itself, but they result from the deliberate choices of the wealthy, powerful people we have permitted to control this technology and how we all use it.
Thank you. And I now call Ros McCall, again, up to 4 minutes. Ms McCall.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm pleased to be closing the debate today on behalf of the Scottish Conservatives. And I thank Pam Duncan-Glancy and Labour for bringing this to the Chamber again regarding the concerns that I think we can all see in the Scottish education system. The issues around mobile phones use in classroom has been a concern on these benches for many years. It was a point that was first raised by my colleague Sue Webber back in November 2023. I think we were discussing violence in schools at the time, and we're almost 2 years on and still debating the negative influences of mobile phones incorrectly utilised within our schools. The Scottish Conservatives have been aware of this issue for years and have actively been lobbying to ensure that Scotland's young people have suitable learning environments within the classroom. I think we must all surely agree that it's essential that our classrooms are conducive for inquiring young minds to learn, inquire and grow. That has to happen within a structured atmosphere and without external influences and mechanisms to distract young people from the task that's in front of them. In 2024, a Scottish Secondary Teachers Association survey found that 71% of its members believed that the misuse of mobile phones had a negative impact on behaviour and learning, while more than 90% of their lessons were being interrupted by asking students to put away their mobile phones. And 3/4 of teachers said that mobile phones disrupted nearly all of their lessons. These are very stark figures. And even though some local authorities have availed themselves of the guidance empowering head teachers to use restrictions on mobile use, I believe that there's still uncertainty and there's more room in this guidance, and that is why national guidance must be clear about what's expected from our head teachers. Now, I'd like to just mention a couple of points that have come up. I'd like to say to Karen Adams, as much as I listened to her contribution, I don't think that's actually what we've been discussing in the debate today. I noticed that Pam Duncan-Glancy and Miles Briggs mentioned the issues around violence in our classroom, which is exacerbated by mobile phones, which was also in the teachers' survey. And I think we can all agree that teachers and classroom assistants should have a working environment that's completely free from violence, threats and bullying. I thought Stephen Kerr's was an excellent contribution, highlighting the international results that have come from mobile phone bans. I want to go back to Patrick Harvey, if I may. I think that's a very valid point, but a different debate on the influence of social media. We know that there are algorithms that spin us off down a viewer's rabbit hole, but whether that be far-right or leftist propaganda, I think it's aware that many of our young people are seeing possible harmful ideology through social media, and that's definitely something that I think would be a different debate. And finally, on Willie Rennie's point, that there needs to be a clear signal to our head teachers that they know and can believe that we're behind them and that what they're calling for will be listened to. So in conclusion, Presiding Officer, we have many positive recounts recently from schools that have taken steps to limit or even ban mobile phones within classroom time. And the result of increased learning and attainment for the pupils within school is there for all to see. And on one final point, I've previously highlighted the fundamental point that children should be children. There's an innocence that we as a nation should nurture rather than destroy. The effects of mobile phones on growing and developing minds is only just beginning to be explored. And so far, the isolation and anxiety that comes from social media is deeply concerning. This issue is more important than we currently know or are aware of, and I do urge the Scottish Government to update its guidance with clear national direction on what is expected, just as the Scottish Conservative amendment suggests. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call on the Cabinet Secretary up to 5 minutes. Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I welcome the contributions made by members this afternoon, and as I said in my opening remarks, there's a lot of consensus around the Chamber on this issue. We all recognise the significant harm that mobiles can cause when they are used inappropriately or maliciously. Many of us will have had personal experience of that. I was listening this morning to a group of pupils at Portobello High School, and one of them spoke with eloquence about the impact of the mobile phone ban in Portobello. And she said, when our phones went down, our heads went up. And it was a comment that stayed with me throughout the course of this morning and our interactions with the International Council of Education Advisors who are here at the current time. But we also recognise more broadly the impact that mobile phone use can have in our classrooms, whether that be a class of 30 pupils, each receiving 18 notifications an hour, and that amounted to significant disruption to learning and teaching as a result. There's also a consensus that where mobile phones are causing problems, and so it is entirely appropriate for schools to act to restrict young people's access to them. I do think where we differ, and Willie Rennie quite rightly spoke to this, is how potential bans should be implemented. Let's remember that head teacher at Portobello High School took 9 months to implement his full ban. That wasn't a top-down ban, that was working with his whole school community. Now, Neil Bibby, quite rightly, I thought, pointed out pupils with additional support needs and those with caring responsibilities. And every head teacher I know who's implemented a ban has worked to provide support to those groups. It's important that head teachers are able to do that. The national guidance gives advice and guidance to head teachers on how they might do that. We heard contributions from members across the Chamber, so if I may comment on some, Mr Kerr, in his impassioned delivery, spoke about the importance of evidence, and I agree with him wholeheartedly on that point. That's why, of course, the Scottish Government regularly commissions evidence on behaviour in Scotland schools, the last round having published 2 years ago now. The findings from the BISR research, let's remember, also reflected wider societal changes. I think that was some of the point that was being made quite rightly by Patrick Harvey. People... Yes, happy to do so.
Briefly, Steve Kerr.
To the Cabinet Secretary for giving way. Would she like to see a ban of mobile phones in Scotland schools? Would she like to see that? I'm not saying that she's going to direct it or legislate for it, but would she like to see it?
Cabinet Secretary.
I'm going to read to Mr Kerr my own words from the National Guidance on Mobile Phones, which states, I am clear in publishing this guidance that, as Cabinet Secretary, I will support any head teacher who decides to institute a ban on mobile phones in their schools. So I give my full backing to head teachers to do exactly that. I also know, and we have discussed this at length previously, the impact of having a ban in schools in terms of learning and teaching. I will do, but I'm mindful of time, Presiding Officer.
Pam Nucking-Glancy, briefly.
I appreciate the Cabinet Secretary taking the intervention, but does the Cabinet Secretary not understand that teachers, including head teachers, who we all trust in this chamber to implement policy and good education environments in their schools, are desperate for leadership from their government so that their government can set out what their expectations are on a ban on mobile phones in school? That's what this motion is asking the Cabinet Secretary to do today.
I can give you some of that time back.
Ms Nucking-Glancy and I have debated this point at length previously, and the points I made in my introductory remarks relate to the legal framework as it currently operates. But I am confused somewhat by the Scottish Labour Party's position on this issue, because only earlier this year in March, Ms Nucking-Glancy's boss, Sir Keir Starmer, said that a complete mobile ban in schools is, and I quote, completely unnecessary. So there does seem to be some dubiety in relation to the Labour Party's position on whole school bans. I have no time in hand, as I am aware, Presiding Officer. I would like to make some progress. I'm happy to discuss this with the member out with the Chamber. Now, I do think it's important, Presiding Officer, to be mindful of those wider societal issues. And Pauline McNeill quite rightly spoke about the increases in misogyny. The increases that we've seen in recent times in some toxic behaviour online are not limited to our schools. And I think it is important we recognise some of those societal shifts in impacting and holding a mirror up to some of the behaviour we now see in our schools. More broadly, though, I go back to the implications for how we implement this ban. We have to trust Scotland's teaching profession. I've been very clear in the national guidance that head teachers will have my full support to implement a mobile phone ban should they so wish. Many schools have already done that. Many local authorities have already undertaken that work. Mr Rennie quite rightly spoke to the need for evidence to inform any future thinking on this topic, and I agree with him. That's why, of course, the Government will be reviewing the impact of the ban in advance of the next election to understand how that ban is operating across the country. I think that is the right and proper approach to informing future policy developments. But, Presiding Officer, it is important to trust our teaching profession. This national guidance, which I've heard criticism from throughout this afternoon, was developed by the Scottish Advisory Group on Relationships and Behaviour in Schools. The membership of that group includes the EIS, the NASUWT, the Scottish Secondary Teachers Association, School Leaders Scotland and the Association of Heads and Deputies in Scotland and, of course, Unison. So, when members purport to represent the views of teachers across Scotland, I know our approach has the backing of Scotland's professional associations. And of course, those professional associations, those trade unions, are best placed to make these decisions and of course represent their members. And they have the full trust in so doing and the backing of the Scottish Government in doing that. And that's exactly what the National Guidance on Mobile Phone Use makes clear.
Thank you. I now call on Martin Whitfield to wind up the debate. Up to 6 minutes, Mr Whitfield.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. It is a pleasure to close for Scottish Labour today in this debate, which I will perhaps contradict some of the submissions I've actually found remarkably interesting. Because mobile phones and digital technology, well, I suppose before I start, my apologies, Deputy Presiding Officer, I should remind those viewing and those within the chamber of my declaration of interest, having been a teacher some while ago that straddled the start of the time in this place. Mobile phones and digital technology generally have had huge impact and have had huge potential, and they do touch every aspect of our lives. Even back in the 80s, if the phones were still attached to the wall, they tended to cause anger amongst my parents when the phone calls came in. And they are genuinely a hugely valuable tool that allows young people to access information. However, and I think a lot of the submissions this afternoon have shown how seriously we now need to take of mobile phones, of the internet, of the World Wide Web, of fake information, false information, because of the negative impact that they're having on our pupils throughout their whole lives, but in particular in the classroom. And to pick up what Neil Bibby said, the evidence of bullying that's continuing in our school estates, but then carrying on afterwards through the use of mobile phones. The sickening examples of the filming of children fighting each other, often in fights that have been provoked through use of mobile phones, is incredibly worrying, as is the content that is being beamed down to those phones. And we need to be concerned because these mobile phones, smartphones, are damaging the environment in our classroom. And that brings me to, of course, the submissions from various people. And I'd like to start with the Cabinet Secretary and to remind the Cabinet Secretary of the requirement of that 1980 Act, which is that the Secretary of State may make regulations prescribing the standards and requirements to which every education authority shall conform in discharging their functions under Section 1 of this Act. That is, to provide the educational environment and the right number of facilities in which the education is to happen. And I raise that because we do ban things for children. I think Ros McCall was right. Children are entitled to a childhood. They're entitled to be told not to smoke. They are entitled to be told not to drink alcohol. They may, in due course, be entitled to be told not to attend greyhound racing. We do place parameters around our children's lives. We do it because we are adults and parents, and part to speak of the developing stages that children go through. We do it because it is good for them sometimes to push up against walls to see how far they can go and why they are there. A number of contributions have talked about or have implied that there is no trust in teachers or indeed head teachers within schools from Scottish Labour. That is simply nonsense. We trust our teachers We trust our teachers to deliver the curriculum for excellence that requires certain signpost activities to be arrived at, and we empower them to teach that the way that is appropriate and correct for that small group, large group, entire school that sits before them to do it. I will do.
Briefly, Cabinet Secretary.
So I'm interested in the point that Martin Whitfield is making, and of course any regulatory power move that I think the member has been suggesting would take power away from local authorities and centralise power to national government. But more broadly, I am struck by the approach from the NESUWT, who have been quite critical of the UK Government's position in relation to this. So Dr Patrick Roach has said that if the Government introduces blanket bans that are unenforceable, this will make the behaviour crisis worse, not better. This takes me to the point that it is about how you enforce bans, but it's also about how you trust Scotland's teaching profession. Would the member respond to that point?
Martin Whitfield.
My deepest regrets for interrupting the contribution, but of course education has devolved here in Scotland. But to the very question that I think the Cabinet Secretary was talking about, it would be easier to go to Article 12 of the UNCRC and say, why are children not involved in this decision? Of course children are involved in this decision in exactly the same way as we've heard the brilliant examples of head teachers working with their communities about how you implement the ban. But to come to what I think has been the genuine question here, apologies for sounding the genuine question for here, we have to turn to Willie Rennie's opening. Because our schools, our head teachers, our parents and our children are looking for authority in that message. Our head teachers need the support. There needs to be a clear message. And to slightly corrupt the contribution of Willie Rennie, this Parliament, this Scottish Government should give agency to our schools to be able to say no mobile phones in classrooms unless there is a need for it. That, unless there is a need for it, is what will be devised through the discussions with the young people themselves, the school community and the parents. Because we have heard the overwhelming evidence that actually there is a potential that mobile phones, smartphones, are rewiring the brains of our young people. And we cannot go down that line without giving full and proper support. I think it is right to say that we can't have leadership if there's no listening. But we do need leadership when there has been listening. The Cabinet Secretary has the power to do this, not in a directorial top-down way, but in a way to say, this is the message, implement it in the way that you need. And I think, to be fair to Stephen Kerr's intervention, I'm not quite sure the Cabinet Secretary has gone that far by making reference to supporting head teachers who do that. And at that point, I'm grateful, Deputy Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr Whitfield. That concludes the debate on mobile phones in schools. There will be a brief pause before we move to the next item of business to allow front benches to change.